Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. So today we're going to do something a little bit drastic, and that is transplant Strawberry Hill. It's been growing up in an obelisk here at the front of the garden. Now 2 years ago we had a pretty bad snowstorm where it completely covered it. We didn't bother moving it out because we figured that was going to melt away. It did some damage to the center of it, but it hasn't grown quite the way we wanted it to, and I think there's a couple of reasons why that I'll get into a little bit later. But the first thing I got to do is I got to go ahead and prune that back, and then we're going to take it out of that pot, possibly move the whole pot, because I think there's some tap roots that went through the actual pot into the ground. So we're gonna do a little bit of root pruning as well. So we're gonna just prune it back completely because we're gonna transplant it, and then we're gonna do some root pruning once we get it out of that container there and possibly transplant it into a smaller container. So first, before I even get started with that, I do wanna thank all you guys that are still following along, that are supporting us on our channel here. As you all know, I am retiring, and my retirement is official here in September. But if you want to continue supporting us and want us to do this 100% of the time as far as doing YouTube videos and gardening, we would love to do that. We need your support in liking, sharing, and commenting on these videos to get that out there a little bit more to other people who enjoy this type of gardening as well. All right, so first things first, before I get started pruning Strawberry Hill, is I got to make some room up here. I'm definitely going to miss gardening in this type of environment where I have to maneuver to do all kinds of stuff. Not really, but okay, so I got that out of the way. I'm gonna go ahead and prune it all the way back. Now this is gonna hurt because I am gonna cut it completely back. Now we've done this before. We uprooted some Harlow-Carr roses that had a pretty big taproot, and I know this guy has a pretty big taproot that already went through the container down there, so I'm gonna have to cut that back. And I'll talk a little bit more about the roots and how we're gonna prune that back as far as the tap roots and the fibrous roots go. But for now, first thing, like I said, is I'm gonna have to prune all this back, and I hate to do it because this is a beautiful rose, and I've seen many of you that actually have Strawberry Hill and it's growing beautifully and it's still blooming today. I have a few suspicions as to why this one is not blooming, and there's a big reason for that. As you all know, we had some neighbors before that didn't quite like what we were doing, and there is actually a lilac down there that is doing beautifully right now, and it hasn't done that for a couple of years. And my suspicion is that there was possibly something being put in these plants that were keeping them from growing the way they're supposed to grow, because again, that lilac is absolutely growing this year, and it wasn't doing that in previous years. And Strawberry Hill was absolutely doing great the first 2 years that we planted it here. Now we did one year find some powder in our container, and we were told it was snake repellent. Not 100% sure how factual that was, but that's what I was told. But I will tell you that from that point on, this rose was not growing as great as it was. So I need to remove this obelisk. Before I do that, I'm gonna go ahead and prune this all the way back. All right, so now that the obelisk is out of the way, I'm gonna go ahead and attempt to get this container out of here so I don't have to do most of my work up here, because like I said, this is my favorite way of gardening, but I don't want to deal with it right now. So I'm gonna go ahead and take this container off, move it over to the side of the house. But first I want to show you the taproot that I was talking about, because it does have a pretty big taproot that's going into the ground. How far that's actually going, I don't know, but I can imagine that it's gone pretty good into the ground, because roses do have a pretty thick taproot that like to travel laterally and vertically. So we'll see how far that goes into the ground, if we can pull it up. If not, we're just gonna cut it right there where it's at, and I'll talk a little bit about it when I cut it. So I'm tipping over the container just a bit, just to show you guys what I'm talking about. So you can see down here, that container's pretty much falling apart. The rose completely grew through it. Lots of water up here as well because of the hill. But you can see that taproot right there. See that? It's a pretty big taproot that's going into the ground here. I don't know how far it goes. We're probably not gonna pull that one up, not attempt to pull it up. It actually has about 2 taproots, pretty good roots that we're gonna have to cut back. All right, so the taproot's there. Just gonna cut as far down as I can to release the rose from the ground there. There might be other roots on the other side, but I think that's gonna pretty much be it. Nope, there's one more in there that I gotta find. And I think we've got them all. Yep, so we got that out. All right, so here's the aftermath of moving the rose container there. You can see those roots still right there that were going into the ground. I'm not gonna attempt to pull those up. Chances are it could grow again, but we're gonna cut it back as far as we can to the ground. Here are the remnants of that container. Like I said, it completely busted through. It's just material that, you know, degrades over time. Looks like some fiberglass container fragments there. You can see the little tag there. We bought this one at Big Lots years ago. People asked where I got these containers. So they last about a good 4 or 5 years. That's how long these lasted until they started breaking through the bottom. I imagine if you have it on concrete or something, maybe it does a little bit better, but sitting in soggy soil, not gonna do that great. But here's the rose after I took it out. Got some celosia growing from years back that reseeded itself in there. But we're gonna go ahead and move this over to the side of the house and get it out of here and transplant it to another container. All right, so as you can see, this container's not doing great at all. So I'm gonna do my best to move it over to the side of the house where I'm actually gonna do the work on it. And we'll clean up the mess afterwards. My fear is that it's gonna bust through the bottom, so I'm gonna take a shortcut here on the hill and walk as fast as I can to the side of the house. All right, so putting the rose right here because got a nice little spot to work at, but this is where we're gonna work on it. Luckily, none of it busted through and spilled all over the place. We're gonna make quite a mess here, but we'll clean it up afterwards. Like I said, just get a rake, spread out this soil because it's good soil. So next thing we're gonna do is I'm gonna attempt to grab the rose, take it out of the container completely, so we can transplant to a smaller container that makes it easier for transporting. All right, so I got an assortment of tools here because plants that are root bound or possibly root bound in containers of this size or of different shapes are a little bit harder to take out. You might need to cut around them. In this case, I'm gonna have to go ahead and scoop out some of the soil so I can get this rose out without prickling my fingers. In a container such as a nursery pot or something round, something smaller, probably be easier to tip it over and just pull it right out. But again, like I said, because this one's falling apart, it's a weird square shape as well. We want to go ahead and scoop as much as we can out so that way we can take the rose out intact without damaging any more than what we have to, even though we're still going to cut some of the roots. Now I got this Nilo kneeler here that is awesome. If you don't have one, I suggest getting something for your knees because over time it does play a critical role in your old age. Again, I'm just going to start scooping out here and transferring some of the soil into a nursery pot. Some of the soil is still good. I might be able to use this to replant it, but we're gonna get as much as we can out to make it a lot easier to pull it out. So I'm slowly trying to pull it up as I remove some of the top layer of soil there, and it came out pretty good, pretty easy. Just gonna remove some of the soil here a little bit to see what's going on with the root system. Like I said, there was quite a bit of taproot, some very thick roots, as you can see, very healthy looking root system. All right, so we have our bare root here. This is what they look like pretty much when they send them to you if you buy them bare root, or if you buy it from a nursery that has planted bare root roses. This is what's pretty much going in a container. So I have no doubts that this is gonna do absolutely well. I'm gonna prune it back a little bit more because, like I said, I was gonna talk a little bit about pruning this when we transplant it. One thing you don't want this rose to do is you don't want it to concentrate all its energy on producing more growth or flowers. You want the energy to get pushed into more root growth. After all, we did transplant it, we did cut the tap roots. We're not gonna mess with too much of the fibrous roots because this is perfect to fit into a nursery pot or a smaller container. So we can transplant this and take this with us. So I'm just gonna do some very heavy pruning up top because again, I don't want this to put any growth up here. This is, anything you see dead as well, just go ahead and remove the dead stuff because that's not gonna be viable, and this is a good opportunity to reshape your rose if you are transplanting it, reshaping it to how you want it to grow. So we're just going to take all this off, make sure that we have some nice healthy live shoots here. I mean, that looks good, it looks healthy, nothing growing beneath the rootstock there. So this is all Strawberry Hill here. And I have no doubts that this is gonna come back nice and sturdy and beautiful. Now it may surprise you that it's gonna start to put out some shoots now that you've cut it back. But the main goal is, again, is for it to put all its energy down here. So we're gonna go ahead and get a container real quick, transplant it, and I'll talk a little bit more about what we're doing to make sure this absolutely thrives in its new container. All right, so I have my container that we're gonna transplant Strawberry Hill into. Now I have a few other things that we're gonna use to make sure that this rose thrives and does its best. Now we did some severe pruning to the tap roots here, but what we didn't touch was the fibrous roots. And like I said, I was gonna talk about that. One thing you don't wanna mess with is the fibrous roots, because those roots are the ones that are gonna do all the intake of the nutrients and water for the rose to actually thrive. The tap root's gonna grow into the ground and shoot out more fibrous roots to give that rose a better growth rate. Now, to ensure that the roots get the best possible start, what I'm using is Biotone Starter. Biotone Starter, in my opinion, is the best thing you can use for transplants or planting any plant in general, because it's gonna give it its best possible start. So one thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use a lot of the soil that we had in that container, because a lot of it contains mulch. Mulch is gonna help keep this rose well watered. It's gonna absorb moisture and keep it nice and watered while it's transplanted and while we're traveling. The best way that we can keep it watered is by using mulch. So there's a mix of mulch already in here. I'm gonna fill it up just as much as I can to get this rose planted the way I need it to. Now that's a good spot right there. Now without prickling myself, the next thing I'm gonna do, like I said, is I got my scoop here. I'm gonna get about a scoop of Biotone Starter and just mix it all around the roots here, because I want that Biotone to help activate those roots in taking up newer nutrients and water to give it the best possible growth in this container, and then you'll start to see some growth. So I said earlier, don't be surprised if it starts showing some growth, some sprouting. That's because what I use is the Biotone. That Biotone gets it to start activating quickly and keeps it from getting that transplant shock, so it starts to want to put some more growth into the actual shoots here that we pruned back. But I want the roots to absolutely make it. So along with the Biotone and the soil that has a mulch, I'm gonna use land and sea compost as well. So land and sea compost is gonna help it as well. And once I got in there, now I'm just gonna fill the rest of it with some soil. Get it all the way to the top here. Make sure our row stays in place the way we want it to. Now, maybe a little bit crooked, and I'm okay with that, because again, this is just for transplanting purposes. Once we get to the new home, we may plant it in a bigger container or put it into the ground, depending on where we end up. All right, so I added some more soil in here. Next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add some mulch to the top layer of this container. Now, you're probably looking at the way I planted this rose and you're wondering about the root graft. Now, the root graft, depending on what you're going for, you can plant it underneath the soil. That crown should be underneath the soil, but I know this rose is gonna get replanted again. It's gonna be put under a lot of stress. So I'm not really too worried where that root graft is at. As long as this guy is transplanted and doing well, that's all I'm concerned about right now, because once we move, this guy will definitely go into a bigger pot, or it might go in the ground. That's my only concern right now, is that the roots make it and this guy is gonna survive the trip. But that's pretty much it for this video, guys. Just transplanting this rose, ensuring that it's gonna survive and do its best for the next season as well. Now, other questions I may get is, when should you transplant roses? Honestly, you can transplant roses at any time of the season. I wouldn't recommend it during winter, because it's gonna be cold and who wants to be out there gardening anyway. Winter should be for prepping for spring and stuff like that, but fall, summer, spring, at any time you can transplant these roses, especially when you're using good products like Espoma. You're gonna ensure that it does absolutely well. All right, guys, so that's gonna do it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you have any questions on transplanting roses, please leave it in the comments down below. We'll be more than happy to answer those questions. Like I said earlier in the video, if you haven't liked, shared, or subscribed to this channel, definitely do that. Help us get out there, help this channel thrive. We appreciate all the support we have already received and still continue to receive. We want this channel to expand a little bit more. As you know, I will be retiring soon. It's official September 30th, but I wanna make this something that we can grow upon and grow with you guys as well. Again, that's gonna do it. We'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.